It was just after 9 p.m. on a cold January night, when police found the body of an 18-year-old high school senior lying lifeless in the living room of a respected family home in Crestwood, Oregon. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where porch lights flickered gently and families settled in early with mugs of tea and the evening news. But on January 15, 2017, sirens shattered the silence of Maple Hollow Drive. Inside the Callahan residence, a modest three-bedroom home on the edge of town, officers discovered a scene that would haunt Crestwood for years. On the living room floor lay the body of Emily Grayson, a senior at Crestwood High School. Just 18 years old. The star of the cheerleading team. Bright, beautiful, and now inexplicably dead in the home of her basketball coach Derek Callahan. She wasn't found on school grounds. Not at a party. Not in a car on some back road. She was found in the home he shared with his wife. Within hours, word had spread. First whispered among neighbors. Then shouted through online forums and late-night news broadcasts. A high school student, dead in the home of her married coach? It didn't make sense. And in Crestwood, a town where everyone thought they knew everyone, it was unthinkable. Parents were outraged. Students stunned. Teachers shaken. Local reporters swarmed the street, cameras flashing in the rain. No one could make sense of it. Not yet. The initial police statement was brief. We are investigating an incident involving a student at Crestwood High. No further details will be released at this time. But behind the scenes, detectives were already unraveling the threads. Emily hadn't been some stranger who stumbled into the wrong house. She had a history with Derek Callahan, a relationship that began months earlier and would spiral into jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately, deadly violence. To understand how a promising student ended up dead, and how a respected coach lost everything in the span of a few months, you have to go back to the beginning. To the fall of 2016. To Crestwood High. Where Emily Grayson was the girl everyone knew and Derek Callahan was the coach nobody questioned. If you've been here before, thank you. You already know we don't just tell stories, we unearth them. The ones that stay with you. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're watching but haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself why. Is it because you're just passing through, or because stories like this make you feel something you'd rather not sit with? Either way, we'd love to know. Drop a comment and tell us what's holding you back. And if you are one of the few who believes these stories deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. To those who knew him, Derek Callahan was the kind of man people naturally gravitated toward. At just 28 years old, Derek had become a local favorite at Crestwood High, not because he demanded attention, but because he earned respect. With an easy smile and a calm, confident voice, he had a way of making everyone feel seen, from his struggling benchwarmers to star athletes with Division I dreams. He wasn't just the new basketball coach, he was a mentor, a role model, the kind of person teachers trusted and students looked up to. And off the court, it looked like life had rewarded him accordingly. In April of 2015, Derek married his college sweetheart, Rachel, in a small but elegant outdoor ceremony that the whole town still talked about. Rachel was the picture of warmth and patience, a kindergarten teacher whose quiet strength made children adore her and adults feel instantly at ease. Together, Derek and Rachel had recently moved into a cozy three-bedroom home on the outskirts of Crestwood. It wasn't large, but it was full of possibility, a house with a front porch swing, a backyard for future birthday parties, and just enough creaky floorboards to feel lived in. They were the kind of couple people pointed to and said, "That's what it's supposed to look like." Weekends were spent decorating rooms, painting nursery walls in soft yellows, even though they hadn't picked a name yet. Rachel kept a notebook by the bed, where she scribbled baby names in loopy handwriting and occasionally drew tiny hearts beside her favorites. For Rachel, The future was glowing just beyond the horizon, a life of bedtime stories and backyard barbecues, school drop-offs and sleepy morning kisses. For Derek, it was more complicated. The transition to married life had been both exciting and exhausting. Coaching a high school team meant long nights, game footage, strategy meetings, late bus rides home from away games. And when he finally did get home, Rachel was usually fast asleep with papers to grade and a cup of herbal tea still warm on the nightstand. But she never complained. Not once. Rachel understood what coaching meant to him. She encouraged him to pour everything into it because she believed in him, and believed they'd always find time for each other. Derek, for his part, was grateful. And guilty. Because as the demands of his new life pulled him in different directions, husband, coach, leader, he didn't always know how to be all three at once. And that's when the cracks began to show. Not in his marriage. Not yet. But in him. And in the vulnerable silence that crept in when Rachel went to bed early, and someone else stayed late after practice. Someone with a bright smile, a cheerleading uniform, and a secret craving for attention that Derek never saw coming. At 17 years old, Emily Grayson was the kind of girl who turned heads the moment she walked into a room. Captain of the Crestwood High cheerleading squad, she radiated confidence, long dark hair always perfectly curled, uniforms tailored just enough to flatter, and a smile that made people believe she didn't have a single worry in the world. But that was a lie. Because when Emily walked off campus and the cheers faded into silence, she went home to something entirely different. To a small two-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and broken blinds. To a mother who spent more time passed out on the couch than sober, and a father who had vanished when she was just 10, a departure that came without warning, and without a single goodbye. Emily's childhood wasn't filled with bedtime stories or family dinners. It was filled with slamming doors, silent treatments, and the smell of cheap vodka soaked into the carpet. She learned early that the world wasn't going to hand her love, she had to take it. And she did. She became an expert at reading people, at figuring out exactly what they wanted and giving it to them, not because she cared, but because she needed something in return. Attention. Validation. Control. By senior year, Emily had perfected the art of being wanted. She had boys wrapped around her finger, teachers who adored her, and an entire school that saw her as radiant and untouchable. But beneath the surface, she was aching for stability, for consistency, for someone who would look at her and not see just a pretty face, but a person worth holding on to. She kept a box under her bed filled with torn notebook pages, fragments of love letters she'd written but never sent. Each one ended with a fantasy. A better life, a stable home, someone who would finally choose her. That hunger, the kind that twisted itself into obsession, was always there, waiting for someone to feed it. And then she met Derek Callahan. It started small. Innocent even. Emily had started hanging around the gym after cheerleading practice, claiming she needed to grab her bag or forgot her water bottle. In truth, she just wanted to watch the basketball team, or more accurately, their coach. Derek was everything her life wasn't. Structured. Safe. Warm. He treated his players with respect. He encouraged them. He had presence but not arrogance. Authority but not cruelty. He was older, stable, married, and to someone like Emily, who had never known boundaries, that wasn't a warning sign. It was an invitation. At first she just watched. Then she started to linger a little longer. She'd offer a compliment here. A joke there. She'd ask about the team, about the plays, about anything that would keep him talking. And when he answered, he didn't look at his phone. He didn't rush her out the door. He looked her in the eye. He listened. And for a girl who had spent her entire life begging the world to notice her, that was all it took. In her mind, Derek wasn't just a coach. He was the escape. The one who might finally see the girl behind the smile and love her anyway. It was September 2016 when the pattern began. At first, no one thought much of it. Emily Grayson was often one of the last to leave the gym after cheerleading practice, rummaging in her bag for a missing lip gloss, retying her ponytail, or pretending to wait for a ride. But anyone paying close attention would have noticed where her gaze kept drifting. To the other side of the gym. To Derek Callahan, pacing the court with a clipboard in hand, his voice echoing across the bleachers as he barked out drills and encouraged his players. Emily wasn't interested in basketball. She was interested in him. She watched the way he led, confident, calm, always in control. The way his players looked at him like he mattered. Like he had answers. To Emily, who came from a world where grown men disappeared or broke things when they stayed, Derek felt different. He was safe, present, kind. What started as admiration quickly evolved into something more. A harmless crush, she told herself. And so she lingered. Just long enough for him to notice. The first time they spoke, it was nothing, just a quick, "Good night, coach," as she passed by. But the next time she added a compliment, "You're really good with them, you know." Derek smiled, thanked her, and turned back to his clipboard. But something about the way she said it stuck with him. At that point, Derek was still adjusting to everything. The long hours, the late-night film reviews, the weight of his first full season as head coach. At home, Rachel was usually asleep by the time he got in, curled up under blankets with grading papers spread across the bed. They barely saw each other during the week. They tried to make up for it on weekends, but even those felt rushed now. Rachel never complained. She supported him without fail. But Derek, for all his love for her, was starting to feel invisible. And that's what made Emily's attention feel so validating. She wasn't clingy. She didn't ask for anything. She just listened wide-eyed, smiling, genuinely interested. After a few weeks, she started stopping by his office after practice. Sometimes she'd pretend to ask for advice on her college applications. Other times she'd claim she needed feedback on a cheer routine. Once, she brought him a homemade protein bar, saying she figured he didn't eat enough during game weeks. He laughed and thanked her. She laughed back and made sure to brush his arm just slightly when she handed it to him. It all felt harmless at first. To Derek, she was just another student, charismatic, clearly craving guidance, and probably a little too used to getting her way. But still, he didn't shut it down. He didn't report it. He didn't tell Rachel. He told himself he was just being kind. A mentor. A steady presence in a troubled student's life. But Emily wasn't playing by the same script. She saw every interaction as a seed. A sign. A promise. And as her visits grew longer and their conversations more personal, Derek began to feel it too, the shift. The tension. He knew the boundary was there. But for the first time in his life, he was starting to wonder what it might feel like to cross it. By October 2016, Emily Grayson had stopped pretending. She didn't just linger near the gym anymore, she waited, watched, and calculated. Her visits to Derek Callahan's office were no longer occasional. They were expected. After cheer practice, while the last players zipped their duffel bags and gym doors echoed shut, Emily would drift in like clockwork. At first, her questions stayed safely within the bounds of mentorship. How do I build confidence? Should I try for a leadership role? What do colleges look for in essays? But slowly she pivoted. The cheer uniform grew tighter. Her conversations softer, more personal. She'd perch on the edge of his desk, knees crossed just so, eyes locked on his with a quiet intensity. And her questions changed. One night, she lingered longer than usual. Derek, half turned in his chair, casually asked if she was doing okay. Her voice dropped. "Do I look okay to you?" She smiled faintly, but there was something different in her eyes, something distant, broken. And just like that, the floodgates opened. She talked about her mother, passed out by 6 p.m. most nights, drunk and incoherent. how she cooked her own meals, did her own laundry. How there were days she couldn't even look at herself in the mirror without feeling like she didn't exist. Then came the line that made Derek sit up straighter. "You're the only adult who actually listens to me." He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. And in that silence, something shifted. Emily could sense it, the hesitation in his eyes, the guilt in his throat. But more importantly, the lack of resistance. That's all she needed. Derek told himself this was normal, that it wasn't unusual for students to confide in trusted teachers. That if he just offered her the support she lacked at home, she might finally have a shot at something better. He wanted to believe that, because the truth the part he couldn't say out loud was harder to sit with. The truth was that Emily's vulnerability made him feel needed. And the attention? It didn't feel so inappropriate in the moment. Especially not when she touched his arm. Or when she bit her lip during pauses in conversation. Or when she sat just a little too close and told him he was the only man in her life who hadn't walked away. Derek still saw himself as the good guy. A mentor. A protector. But even he knew deep down that he was inching toward a line he wasn't supposed to cross. It happened on a Thursday night, late October. The gym was quiet. The echo of sneakers and whistles long gone. Derek had stayed behind to finish some paperwork. Emily showed up claiming she'd left her phone. He let her in. She thanked him, lingered, sat down across from him like she belonged there. The conversation was calm at first. Casual. Then she said something that made his stomach twist. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you met someone before your wife?" Derek froze. "I think about that all the time," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. And then she leaned in. Her hand touched his. Her lips parted. The silence between them screamed. And he didn't stop her. In that moment, the excuses collapsed. The boundary, once thin, fragile, and wavering, shattered. And neither of them would come back from it. By November 2016, the tension between Derek Callahan and Emily Grayson was no longer just emotional. It was electric, constant, unspoken but undeniable. The way she looked at him during warm-ups. The way she lingered near the locker room door just long enough for their eyes to meet. The way his hand hesitated at his phone every time it buzzed with her name. He told himself it was a phase, that it would pass. That he could still pull back. But that illusion shattered one night, after a particularly brutal home game. Crestwood had lost by double digits. The bleachers had emptied. The court sat silent, streaked with sweat and defeat. Derek had stayed late to go over stat sheets, sitting alone in his office under the humming buzz of fluorescent lights. He rubbed his temples, exhausted, when he heard the gym door creak open. It was Emily, claiming she'd left her sweatshirt in the stands. But she didn't go looking for it. Instead, she sat beside him, too close, and started talking. About the game. About how the team played. About how sorry she was he had to deal with that kind of pressure. Then her voice softened. "You deserve better. You really do." She touched his knee. He didn't move. The silence stretched. And then, like a match finally striking, it happened. In the stillness of that empty gym, under the distant echo of bouncing balls and memories of cheers, Derek kissed her. And then kissed her again. It was fast. Messy. Charged with weeks of restraint and blurred lines. There were no grand declarations. Just a desperate need to feel something, anything that wasn't guilt or pressure or failure. For Emily, it was everything. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. Because in her mind, this wasn't the start of an affair. It was the beginning of a love story. What began as a single mistake quickly became a routine. Their secret meetings became clockwork. Late nights in Derek's office after practice. Hushed whispers under the bleachers when the gym lights dimmed. Once, even behind the locked door of the equipment room while the school echoed with early morning silence. They moved like shadows, never touching in public, never texting anything too obvious. Emily mastered the art of subtle glances in the hallway. Derek perfected small talk that meant nothing to everyone else but everything to her. To the outside world they were still coach and student. But behind closed doors? They were tangled in something neither of them could control. For Derek, the guilt came quickly and it came often. He'd go home to Rachel, who greeted him with sleepy smiles and questions about his game. He'd sit across from her at dinner, nodding along as she talked about her classroom and baby name ideas, feeling the weight of his lies stack higher with every silent bite of food. He loved her. That was the worst part. He loved his wife. And he hated himself for betraying her. But he also couldn't seem to stop. For Emily there was no guilt. Only euphoria. This was what she had always dreamed of, a man who wanted her. Who chose her. Who saw her for more than a cheer uniform and perfect teeth. And now that she had Derek's attention, she had no intention of letting it go. Each kiss, each secret meeting, pulled her deeper. She imagined their future, imagined Rachel gone. Imagined herself in that cozy house on the outskirts of town, curled up beside Derek on the couch, wearing his ring and carrying his child. In her eyes, she wasn't the other woman. She was the right woman, just waiting for Derek to realize it. By January 2017, Derek Callahan could no longer pretend things were under control. The affair, once fleeting and secret, had become a shadow that followed him everywhere. At first he thought he could manage it, that he could compartmentalize. But Emily Grayson had no interest in being a secret anymore. She began texting him at all hours, sometimes sweetly, sometimes desperately, then aggressively. She'd ask where he was, who he was with, when she could see him again. If he didn't respond fast enough, she'd send follow-ups. Dozens. You're avoiding me. I thought I mattered to you. Is she with you right now? He started silencing his phone during dinner. Then during practice. Then all the time. But the messages didn't stop. Derek had always seen himself as the steady one. The leader. The man who others turned to for answers. But now, he was fractured. Numb. He'd stare at the ceiling at night beside Rachel, wondering how the hell he got here, lying to the woman he loved, spiraling toward a disaster he no longer knew how to escape. Every time he looked at Rachel's face, he saw innocence. Every time he looked at Emily's, he saw recklessness. But he also saw control slipping away. And then in late spring of 2017, Rachel became pregnant. It should have been a turning point, a moment of joy, a symbol of hope. And for a few fleeting weeks it was. Rachel started glowing. She talked more, smiled more. She attended more of Derek's games, often standing near the back of the gym, resting her hand on her growing belly. To the outside world, it was a beautiful chapter for the Callahans. But to Emily it was betrayal. She noticed it immediately, the way Derek's face lit up when he spotted Rachel in the bleachers. The way he walked over to her after games, hand on her back, whispering things that made her laugh. Every glance, every touch, every sign of affection burned like acid in Emily's chest. She thought she was the one he wanted. She thought she was enough. And now, Rachel was carrying the life that should have been hers. It all came to a head on a sticky late summer night, August 14, 2017, during a heated exhibition game at Crestwood High. The gym was packed. The crowd was loud. Emily stood in formation on the sideline in her cheer uniform, pretending to clap and chant like everything was normal. But it wasn't, because halfway through the second quarter, Rachel walked in. Wearing a loose sundress, her belly unmistakably rounded, she smiled as she found a seat near the bench. Derek saw her, smiled back, and for a moment, the weight of his secret life seemed to vanish. Emily saw it too, and she snapped. Her hands balled into fists behind her pom-poms. Her smile disappeared. her eyes locked on Rachel like crosshairs. When the game ended and Derek approached Rachel, wrapping her in a proud hug, Emily didn't wait to see more. She turned, shoved open the locker room door, and vanished into the hallway, tears already burning down her face. In that moment she didn't care how it looked. To her, Rachel's pregnancy wasn't just a symbol of love. It was a declaration of war. And she had no intention of losing. When Emily Grayson stormed out of the gym that night, August 14, 2017, something inside her fractured. The moment she saw Derek Callahan smile at his pregnant wife, that warm, familiar smile he used to give her, a quiet realization bloomed into rage. He's going to choose her. He's going to forget everything. He's going to leave me behind. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark, replaying every kiss, every whispered promise, every time he said, "You matter to me." Now, watching him publicly wrap his arms around Rachel, her world was crumbling. That baby bump wasn't just a symbol of betrayal, it was permanent proof that she had lost. And Emily couldn't lose. Not now. Not after everything. For Derek, that game was a turning point too. He felt Rachel's hand slip into his during the fourth quarter. He felt her lean her head on his shoulder as they walked to the car. And for the first time in months, he realized just how far he had drifted from the life he actually wanted. The affair had gone on too long. It had consumed him, made him into someone he barely recognized. He had to end it. 6 days later, Derek stayed late after practice. He had rehearsed what he would say over and over in his head. He was going to be calm, firm, direct. When Emily arrived, as she always did, uninvited but expected, she walked in with hope in her eyes. That hope dissolved the moment she saw his face. He didn't smile. He didn't get up. He didn't ask how she was. He simply said, "We can't do this anymore." Silence. Then denial. "You don't mean that." Derek stood up, putting distance between them. But Emily stepped forward, her voice rising. "You told me I mattered. You told me you cared." "I do," he replied quietly, "but this has to stop." That was when the tears came, hot, fast, uncontrollable. But not just tears. Anger, panic, threats. She shouted. She pleaded. She told him he was a liar. That she had given him everything. That he was just like every other man who had walked out of her life. And then her voice dropped to a whisper, low, dangerous, trembling. "You don't know what I'm capable of." Derek paused. That line, that tone chilled him more than anything she'd ever said. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, grabbed his bag, and walked out, leaving her sobbing in the middle of his office. But as the door shut behind him, he knew the truth. This wasn't over. And Emily Grayson wasn't going to let go. Not quietly. Not ever. It was a cold, rainy afternoon in early November 2017 when Emily Grayson made her next move. She hadn't seen Derek in nearly 2 weeks. No texts. No late-night meetings. No whispers in the hallway. He was ghosting her. And that terrified her more than anything. She knew where he was. The team was prepping for a winter tournament. She had memorized the schedule. She knew when the buses left. She knew Rachel Callahan would be home alone. She didn't have a clear plan. Just a vial tucked deep in her purse, one she had stolen weeks earlier from her stepfather's nightstand. A sleeping aid in liquid form, meant to calm, meant to slow. But in the right amount, it could do much more. Emily told herself it wasn't poison. Just a warning. Just enough to scare Rachel. Just enough to make her leave. The Callahan house sat quiet on its tree-lined street, wind dancing with the leaves, rain tapping the windows. Emily parked 2 houses down and walked the rest of the way. She rehearsed her lines with every step. "Hey, I think I left my jacket in Derek's car. I just needed to ask him something about practice. Do you mind if I come in for a second?" When Rachel opened the door, she looked exactly how Emily hated her, radiant, even in sweatpants, with her pregnant belly gently rounding beneath a soft hoodie. And she smiled. "Oh hey Emily, you're one of the cheerleaders, right?" Emily nodded. "Yes, one of the cheerleaders. One of the ones who had been sleeping with your husband for months." But she kept her expression sweet. Rachel, warm as ever, stepped aside. "Coming out of the rain. Derek's not here, but if you want, I can check his car for your jacket." As Rachel disappeared down the hallway, Emily stepped into the kitchen. The house was small, cozy. She hated how perfect it felt. On the counter sat a steaming cup of tea, half sipped, still warm. That's when it hit her. The opportunity. Her fingers moved before her brain could catch up. She reached into her purse, her hand shaking as she unscrewed the tiny cap of the vial. "Just a few drops. That's all. It's not poison. It's just to make her sick. Scare her. Make her think something's wrong. Make her leave." Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled so hard she almost spilled it all at once. But she steadied herself, poured just enough, and slid the vial back into her bag. By the time Rachel returned, smiling, apologizing for not finding the jacket, the cup was right where she left it. Emily thanked her politely and left, her pulse racing, her mouth dry, and in her mind, a single thought repeated like a drumbeat. Now she'll understand. Now she'll finally be out of the way. At first it was a stomachache. Rachel thought maybe it was something she ate. She tried to sleep it off, curled up on the couch with her tea and a heating pad. By midnight she couldn't stand. By 2 a.m., Derek was driving her to the emergency room, barely holding it together as she whimpered in pain beside him. She lost the baby by dawn. A tiny life that had only just begun, gone before it could take its first breath. Rachel wept in the sterile white of the hospital bed. Derek didn't cry. He stared at the wall, numb, guilt tearing him apart from the inside. And then it clicked. The timing. The coincidence. The uninvited guest just hours before. Emily. She had been at the house. Rachel didn't think twice about it. But Derek did. He didn't have proof, no cameras, no cup, no confession. But he had a feeling. And in his gut, that feeling bloomed into horror. The next day he found her near the gym, exactly where she used to wait for him. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. Didn't? What did you do?" Her smile froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Rachel lost the baby," he said flatly. "She started getting sick the same night you showed up." Emily didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She simply looked at him, cold, defiant, and said, "You haven't seen what I'm capable of." And with that she walked away. In the days after the miscarriage, Derek Callahan couldn't sleep. The image of Rachel, pale and shaking in a hospital bed, haunted him. The silence of the nursery they had started decorating. The way she clutched his hand when the doctor told them there was nothing they could do. But more than anything, the thought that this wasn't just a tragedy. It might have been intentional. Derek replayed the timeline in his head again and again. The cramps started hours after Emily Grayson's visit. The strange way she lingered in the kitchen. Rachel casually mentioning she had offered her a glass of water, or was it tea? He hadn't seen the cup. He hadn't thought to ask. But in his gut, the truth gnawed at him like acid. He knew Emily. He knew what she was capable of when she felt cornered. He didn't wait long. 2 days after Rachel was discharged, Derek found Emily loitering near the gym, exactly where she always used to wait for him. There was no pretense this time. "Did you do something to her?" he asked. Emily tilted her head, amused. "To who?" "Rachel. She got sick right after you came by." Her smile didn't waver. "That's terrible," she said flatly. "But maybe you should ask yourself why she got sick. Maybe it's karma?" Derek's stomach twisted. "You need help," he said. "No," she replied. "You need to remember who I am. Because if you think you can just erase me like I was some mistake, you're wrong." Her eyes flashed cold, controlled rage behind them. "You have no idea what I'm willing to do." He walked away. Not because he had won, but because he didn't know what else to do. Emily hadn't confessed. But she didn't have to. He could see it in her, the emptiness, the obsession. The willingness to destroy anything that stood between her and what she thought she deserved. Back at the house, Rachel was trying to heal. She cried in the evenings, kept the blinds closed, folded baby clothes they would never use and placed them silently into a box marked, "Someday." And through it all, Derek said almost nothing. He cooked dinner. He sat beside her. He held her at night when the sobs came, but he never opened up, never shared the truth, never told her about Emily's warning or the confrontation, or the sinking feeling that the miscarriage wasn't natural. To Rachel, the silence looked like grief. She thought he was hurting the same way she was. But Derek's silence came from somewhere else, a place of fear, of shame, of knowing that the secret he had kept from his wife had now cost them a life they'd been dreaming about. And while they grieved, Emily spiraled. No longer texting, now watching. She sat outside the school in her car for hours, staring at the gym doors. She'd refresh Derek's social media over and over, zooming in on every post, every comment, analyzing them, reading into them. If Rachel appeared in a photo, Emily would screenshot it, sometimes deleting it, sometimes not. She started skipping practices. Her grades slipped. Her cheer coach raised concerns. Emily offered excuses: migraines, family drama, senior stress. But inside she was unraveling. Derek had pulled away. Rachel had taken back the spotlight. And Emily, in her mind, had nothing left to lose. By January 2018, Emily Grayson was no longer the girl people whispered about in hallways. She was something else now, a shell of who she used to be. 18 years old, but hardened by obsession, rejection, and a storm of emotions she could no longer contain. Her world had collapsed, and all she could see in the rubble was Rachel Callahan. Emily stopped attending school altogether. She barely slept. Barely ate. Her mother had given up trying to reach her, assuming it was just another teenage phase. But this wasn't a phase. It was a final act. She took the gun from her stepfather's closet, a .38 revolver he kept in a locked drawer, carelessly protected by a code she had seen him enter 100 times. She didn't practice. She didn't write a letter. She just waited until January 15th, a Monday. She knew Derek would be out of town, an away game 2 hours north. She had the schedule memorized. The bus left at 3:30 p.m. He wouldn't be back until after midnight. The Callahan house would be empty. Or at least, empty enough. Emily parked her car 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance under the cover of dusk, bundled in a hoodie with the gun tucked in her waistband. She slipped in through the unlocked back door, a careless habit in the small, trusting town of Crestwood. The kind of town that didn't expect storms behind smiling faces. Inside the house was warm. So, a faint scent of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. Photos lined the mantel, smiling images of Rachel and Derek, reminders of a life that Emily believed should have been hers. She waited, hands shaking, breath shallow, the gun cold against her skin. And then around 8:45 p.m. the sound of a car in the driveway. Rachel walked in, arms full of groceries, her keys jangling as she kicked the door shut behind her. She didn't see Emily at first. Not until she stepped into the living room and froze. "Emily?" she said, confused. What are you doing here?" Emily stood there, arms at her sides, eyes wide but hollow. "You ruined everything." Rachel blinked, still holding the grocery bags. "I don't understand." "You took him from me." Rachel's voice softened. Emily, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe you should. Shut up. Emily snapped, suddenly louder, sharper. She stepped forward, pulling the gun from her jacket. Rachel's eyes went wide, not with panic, but calculated calm. Okay, Rachel said, slowly setting the bags down. We can talk, Emily. Just breathe. Emily's hands trembled, but she didn't lower the weapon. Rachel, inching toward the kitchen counter, kept her voice low and even. You're upset. I understand. Let's just sit and... As she spoke, her hand reached behind her, blindly feeling for her phone. She found it, slid it toward her side, unlocked it without looking. 911. She hit the call button with her thumb, pressed the speaker against her thigh, and whispered, 1122 Maple Drive, Crestwood. The dispatcher's voice crackled faintly through the line. But it was enough. Emily heard it. Her eyes snapped down. Her body stiffened. You called the cops? She shrieked, lunging forward. Rachel stumbled back. Emily, please put the gun down. But it was too late. Emily wasn't there to talk. She wasn't there to be heard. She was there to make someone pay. Outside, the neighborhood of Maple Hollow Drive was still as ever, porch lights glowing, dogs barking distantly, television screens flickering through curtains. But inside the Callahan house, panic was blooming like wildfire. Emily Grayson stood in the center of the living room, clutching the revolver with both hands. Her chest heaved. Her eyes darted between the door and Rachel Callahan, who stood frozen against the far wall. The faint voice of the 911 dispatcher still buzzed from the phone Rachel had tossed behind the couch. Emily's knuckles whitened around the gun. You weren't supposed to call them. Emily, Rachel said, her voice barely audible, please just put the gun down. We can still fix this. But Emily's breathing was ragged now, shallow, erratic, dangerous. He was mine. You don't get to win. A siren pierced the night. The red and blue wash of patrol lights painted the walls of the Callahan living room. Emily screamed shrill and cracked and fired. The bullet hit Rachel's shoulder. The pain was instant. Rachel cried out, stumbling backward and collapsing behind the couch, clutching her arm as blood soaked into her sweatshirt. The front yard lit up with floodlights. Officers in tactical gear took positions behind parked vehicles, shouting commands through bullhorns. This is the Crestwood Police Department. We need you to put down the weapon and come out with your hands up. Inside, Emily paced like a caged animal, erratic, untethered from reason. Tears streaked her face, but her grip on the gun didn't falter. You weren't supposed to call them, she muttered again, over and over, like a broken record. You weren't supposed to ruin it. 9:06 p.m. Officers attempted negotiation. A trained hostage negotiator stepped forward with a megaphone, voice calm and steady. Emily, you're not in trouble. We just want to help. Let's talk. You're not alone. But she was alone. In her mind, Derek had abandoned her, Rachel had stolen everything, and now the world was outside with guns and lights and lies. She screamed through the door, the sound raw and animalistic. And then she fired again, blindly, recklessly, 2 shots out the front window. One of the officers, Officer Andrew Keller, 32 years old, a husband and father of 2, was struck in the chest as he took cover behind a cruiser. He died before they could stabilize him. The command team moved quickly. The negotiator tried again. Emily, someone's been hurt. We need you to stop. Please put the gun down. This doesn't have to end this way. But Emily's mind was gone. Her breaths were short gasps. Her legs shaking. She pointed the gun at the front door and waited. 9:20 p.m. The order was given. A SWAT unit breached the back entrance with a flashbang. The door exploded open. Inside, chaos erupted. Emily turned toward the noise, gun raised, fingers trembling. Shots rang out. She pulled the trigger. The officers fired back. 3 bullets struck her center mass, chest, and arm. She dropped instantly. The revolver clattered to the hardwood floor as her body crumpled, blood blooming beneath her like spilled ink. Rachel, still crouched behind the couch, covered her ears as the shouting continued. Then silence. The only sound was the creak of boots across floorboards and the whimpering of a woman who had lost everything but survived. Emily's body lay in the middle of the living room, the same room where her obsession had begun. Where she once imagined herself sitting beside Derek, part of a picture-perfect life that never belonged to her. Now the room was drenched in flashing lights, broken glass, and blood. The girl who couldn't be let go had finally let go of everything. By the morning of January 16, 2018, Maple Hollow Drive no longer looked like just another quiet street in Crestwood. The sidewalks were crowded with reporters. Neighbors stood on their lawns in silence, wrapped in robes and disbelief. Police tape fluttered in the breeze like a yellow scar across the front yard of the Callahan home. Inside, officers processed the scene: the shattered window, the spent shell casings, the trail of blood that led from the living room to the hallway. Outside, the world was beginning to ask the same question. Why was an 18-year-old high school student found dead in the home of her basketball coach? The truth came out quickly. The investigators didn't have to dig far. Texts, voicemails, witnesses, journal entries. A digital thread of obsession stretching back months, and a damning portrait of a relationship that never should have happened. Derek Callahan's name was splashed across headlines within hours. Crestwood coach linked to student in deadly love triangle. Teen dies in coach's home after secret affair turns violent. From mentor to monster, the collapse of Derek Callahan. He didn't fight it. He gave one statement to the authorities, brief, remorseful, and full of guilt, then resigned from his position at Crestwood High the next day. By the end of the week he was gone. No one knew where he went. Just disappeared. Rachel Callahan was released from the hospital a few days later, her shoulder bandaged, her body weak, her heart broken. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't make a public statement. She simply packed a suitcase, gathered a few baby things she hadn't yet found the strength to throw away, and moved back in with her parents 3 towns over. A month later she filed for divorce. There was no dramatic trial. No bitter custody battle. There was just loss and the quiet understanding that the man she had married no longer existed. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was swift. Some blamed Emily. She manipulated him. She was unstable. Others blamed Derek. He was the adult. He had the power. He should have known better. Most blamed everyone. The school district faced lawsuits. The superintendent gave a televised apology. Parents demanded stricter boundaries between staff and students. Counseling sessions were offered in classrooms still echoing with trauma. For a time, Crestwood became the epicenter of national debate about mental health, predatory relationships, accountability, and where the lines should be drawn in schools. But within the town itself, the conversation was quieter, more intimate. A basketball court that once echoed with cheers now sat cold and empty. A classroom once filled with kindergarten drawings had a long-term substitute. And the Callahan house, once brimming with hope, was boarded up by spring. The grass grew long. The mailbox overflowed. No one wanted it. No one could forget what had happened there. In the months that followed, the name Emily Grayson became more than just a headline. She became a warning, a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything that can go wrong when boundaries blur and secrets take root in silence. Some saw her as a victim, a vulnerable teenager failed by the adults around her. A girl who had grown up in the shadows of addiction and abandonment, desperate for love, for structure, for someone to finally choose her. Others saw her as a villain, manipulative, calculating, dangerous. Someone who had seduced a married man, poisoned his wife, and pulled a trigger in a house that wasn't hers. But the truth? It wasn't that simple. Emily's story was never about just one mistake. It was a slow, corrosive unraveling. She wasn't born a monster. She wasn't born broken. She was made by years of neglect, by a world that told her beauty was power, by the belief that being wanted was the same as being loved. When Derek Callahan gave her attention, even the smallest bit, she clung to it like a lifeline. She built her entire identity around it. And when that attention slipped away, so did the last threads holding her together. What began as a crush morphed into obsession. And in the end, that obsession became a weapon. For Derek, the consequences were permanent. His reputation destroyed. His career gone. His marriage dissolved under the weight of betrayal and tragedy. He wasn't the man he thought he was, the mentor, the leader, the role model. He became a case study in failure, in blurred lines, in what happens when an adult chooses complicity over integrity. He didn't just lose his job. He lost his future. And he will carry that guilt, the knowledge that he invited Emily in, that he fed her fixation, that he didn't stop things when he still could, for the rest of his life. Rachel Callahan survived. She healed slowly, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She leaned on her parents, found solace in routine, and let time do its cruel but necessary work. She never spoke publicly about Derek. Never once mentioned Emily by name. Instead, she started over quietly, gracefully, choosing peace in a world that had given her every reason to be bitter. Her strength wasn't loud. It was resilient. The Callahan house remained empty for nearly a year. Windows boarded. Grass uncut. A for sale sign that no one touched. It was once a home filled with promise. Nursery paint samples, folded baby blankets, handwritten lists of names. Now it was just a structure. A shell. A place where obsession met reality, and 3 lives were destroyed in the fallout. Neighbors would glance at it from behind their curtains. Teenagers would whisper about it on walks home from school. No one stayed near it for long. Because it wasn't just a house anymore. It was a reminder. In time, the town of Crestwood moved on. New teachers were hired. The basketball team rebuilt. Graduation came and went. But the story of Emily Grayson, it lingered. In locker room warnings about boundaries. In whispered advice to new hires. In quiet glances exchanged when young girls got too close to authority figures. The tragedy became part of the town's DNA, not because people liked to remember, but because they couldn't afford to forget. This wasn't a story about a villain or a victim. It was a story about the cost of silence. About what happens when red flags are ignored. When power goes unchecked. When people believe that secrets can stay hidden forever. And in the end, it became a testament not just to obsession or betrayal, but to the irreversibility of the choices we make when we think no one's watching. Emily Grayson may be gone, but her name, her story, and the lives she changed still echo through Crestwood. Some stories leave behind questions. Others leave behind warnings. If this one stayed with you, let us know in the comments, what would you have done differently? And if you're one of our returning viewers, thank you for always coming back to the dark corners we dare to explore. If you haven't subscribed yet, ask yourself why. Maybe it's easier to watch from a distance. But if you believe stories like this need to be told, then hit that button. It helps more than you know. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, not every secret stays buried.